All right, everyone, welcome back. Today we're talking about the top 5 stupidest things we've ever done. And yeah, Chris and I are not very bright.
Okay, so the last time we talked, we touched on, we're always touching on things that happened, right? Decades ago, things that we did, places we went, experiences we have. And most of those, right, we remember pretty fondly or with laughter or in the sense of like, God, that was great or that was cool. So I asked you about like something dumb or what do you think the dumbest thing you ever did or bad decision you made, something along those lines. And so then I think I kind of put you on the spot in the sense. And so we thought we'd, circle back, as they say, and talk about that now. So now is the time, Jeff. Now we can sort of talk about some of these experiences that we had that were, again, dumb decisions or dumb things that happened, things that maybe you look back and go, I'm lucky to be alive, even though I did that. And so I thought that's be a good point to start.
Okay. Yeah, no, for sure. And, I think everybody, regardless of what era you grew up in, what decade, most of us made some pretty dumb decisions or things you look back on and go, holy Jesus, how did I live? How did I survive? What was I thinking? We've definitely brushed against that topic a few times in these episodes, but and maybe Chris, just the fact that it was the 70s or 80s make these a little more extreme in some ways. But I did some soul searching and I came up with my top 5. What the hell was I thinking? Moments and or can you believe this kind of thing? Yeah. And I'm ready to go, man.
Right. Okay. And I came up with 5 as well. And I think in the sort of if we want to take the approach, sort of pioneered by David Letterman, and it's not a top 10 list, it's a top 5 list. And I think starting at the 5th and then circling back, to number 1. Right. So,
okay. Gotcha.
I just thought that would be the way to do it. So I'll start. And then we can just kind of ping pong back and forth and see where we end up. All right. So.
All right. Hey, this is one of the first shows that has a little bit of structure to it. We're not just mindlessly riffing. We actually gave this one some thought, home audience.
We gave it some thought. We talked about it offline, and my first one, or actually my 5th one, since we're gonna go in inverse order, is actually it's a dumb thing. But just along the lines of nobody was really hurt, I don't think. There was nothing that was really, nobody's ever in any danger. I never jeopardized. There was never any chance of injury or anything like that. But I look back at it because it was sort of a conscious decision. And I think, man, was I a jackass. Okay. So,
right.
So here goes. So number 5, my top 5 dumb things I ever did. I stopped going out with a girl, just basically stopped calling her. She was, and let me back this up in the sense that she was really nice. She was smart. She was cute. She had a great person, funny, all those things, right? I stopped going out with her because she used to be overweight.
Used to be. Okay. Now we have to dig in a little further. Explain a little bit further on used to be.
She had been overweight, and I actually didn't know her when she was, right? And not that really makes a difference. Maybe it does. I don't know. She was overweight, and being at the age that I was, again, we're thinking this is late teens, I guess. And some of my friends who will remain nameless, kind of latched onto that fact that she used to be overweight. And so by pointing out pictures in the yearbook which turned into jokes like, hey, you better not go out for ice cream, right? Don't take it to Farrell's, let's say, right? And so that essentially turned.
Wow.
And so This says more about me than anybody, right? About her, obviously, because she was great. She's still great. She's to this day. She didn't need me.
Well, Chris, are you saying that she was still great, even though she used to be a little bit heavy? She's still a good human?
Well, I'm just saying, yes, that's not what I meant. But I'm just saying
Wow.
she.
Wow. That's pardon the pun, Chris, but that's very big of you to 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 forgive her for having once been a bit overweight.
I know it's really heavy, huh? It's really heavy. That's not what I meant. That's not what I meant. I'm saying is that she was better
I
off
know.
without a shallow jackass who basically crumpled to peer pressure and penny insults.
Well, I think we all agree on that point.
Right, right. So I just and for whatever reason, hey, like I said, you better not take her out for ice cream. You better not go to Bo Weevil and get hamburgers. And it was
Wow. Yeah.
just a
Right.
matter of and so my fragile ego, my low self-esteem, whatever you want, I fully blame myself 100% because she was great and she deserved much better. And I didn't admit.
You were about to say much more, weren't you? And then it was gonna it was gonna spiral into a horrible joke. It's not so much that she deserved much more, but Chris, she wanted much more at the Souplantation buffet. Is that what you're about to say?
Hey,
What? Chris, this is terrible. I think we've
it was
wandered into
dumb.
yeah,
It was
I
really
get it.
dumb
Okay.
and stupid, and I'm embarrassed by it. Again, nobody, nobody got hurt, nobody died, no accidents, no injuries, no trips to the ER, no really bad hangovers, or throwing up on in the side of the road. None of those things. But in retrospect, eventually it was like, wow, was that dumb? Why was I just like shallow? Go ahead, bring it on. Whatever insult or criticism you want to bring on, I deserve it. I absolutely 100%. I own it right now. I'm owning it right now, decades later.
Well, look, this is a therapy session for both of us because obviously everyone has regrets. And, I totally get it. And I think the theme in this sort of confession of things that you dramatically regret or realize you did something stupid, the theme is oftentimes, what kind of a human am I? Right? That's really what you're thinking, right? And in many of mine, too many to list, Chris, the outcome of these events are always me going, holy shit, what is wrong with me? Right? That is always what happens after these events. And for me, I won't even get into, like I mentioned to you before, how many literal fist fights I got into as a kid that were all 100% my fault. And at the end of the day, wow, what a smartass. I totally deserved that. So to say that I understand your pain here, I certainly do. But that is so funny to not go out with somebody, not because of what they've done now or are doing now, but because of a harmless thing that that happened in the past that is very likely not even close to being anything they had any control over. And
it's terrible.
Oh my gosh,
terrible.
that's awesome. Chris, I mean, the good news is, and this goes back to our theme, in the 70s and 80s, thinking like that and acting like that was no problem, and you couldn't get canceled because there is no physical proof unless you confess, right? Nobody has any proof of anything that happened to us back then. Poor Chris, man. Chris, I was going to say that's a heavy weight to carry, but I don't want to.
No,
I don't want to go there.
And
All right.
It'd be hard to make that a nice pull.
Well, I mean, if she was that heavy, then yeah, very hard to pull.
Okay, no. And again, and I could totally say, hey, and yes, it was peer pressure and it was teasing and it was all those things that, again, someone like me, and yes, maybe now you would say, hey, man, that's fat shaming. It's even worse than that, though. That's used to be fat shaming. I mean, it's ridiculous. You know what I mean? It's beyond. It makes no sense, and I apologize, and that again, it's the rest of my list is a little bit more specific and has some of the jeopardy we talked about, but that's number 5.
Well, Chris, if that was
because it was just dumb, it was a stupid thing to do.
So if that was number 5, I shudder to think what's going to bring you up to number 1. What horrific what horrific thing are you going to have to confess to on number one? I can't even imagine. But wow. Okay. No. Hey, this is a safe space, Chris. And hey, I'm just glad that at my advanced age, I've managed to say relatively slim. Otherwise, I imagine you probably wouldn't even want to be my podcast partner.
All right,
right?
hit me with number 5.
So
let's go.
I've done my best. Okay, here we go. Yeah. So this doesn't have to do with anyone's feelings in terms of just truly stupid decisions. I was involved many, many times in something that was simply referred to as a rock fight. Now, please understand at home, when I say a rock fight, I don't mean Battle of the Bands, and I don't mean throwing little dirt clods at each other. I mean groups of kids actively grabbing rocks, not little rocks, guys, heavy rocks that could really do damage, and throwing them as hard as you could at other kids at a pretty close distance for a prolonged period of time without any sort of helmet at all. And it was just some version of, you guys versus us guys. And we would usually be at a place that Chris and I both know called Lake Murray, where it was just sort of a scrub brush and mountains and boulders and dirt and of course a lake. And again, this is very simple, but this is just usually 3 or 4 kids versus another 3 or 4 kids picking up rocks and throwing it at each other's heads. And by the way, in every single case, somebody didn't just get hurt, they got super hurt. Blood, oftentimes blood, broken noses, right? Honestly, it was one step away from Lord of the Flies. Like, it just was insane. And the fact that it would happen more than once is mind-blowing. And yet there we were again the next weekend going, you know what? I guess it's another rock fight. Let's just see who has to go to the ER this time.
How do you win a rock fight? Attrition? Everybody else has to just quit?
First of all,
you've got 3 guys left and the other 2, it's like 3 to 2. It's like somebody,
right.
You have to quit, right? How do you win? Was there a score?
Chris, there was no more thought that went into who wins than there was into why you're doing it in the first place. It was a spontaneous act that had to evolve into, okay, well, I guess we got nothing else to do. I guess we're going to divide up teams and start throwing rocks at each other's heads. I had friends that were at another level, right? I have a buddy of mine that was actually involved in pellet gun fights, Chris, actual pellet guns shooting at each other. So, and it usually ended with somebody crying or getting pretty badly hurt. And then it eventually broke up and everyone scattered and ran home. But multiple contusions, many bruises. Again, why? Why the hell would we do that? It's a miracle that nobody lost an eye or had permanent brain damage. And yet that was just like, oh, well, time for supper. I guess I'm going to go home now. Rock fight.
I mean, at the very least, you would think somebody gets hit in the mouth, has to go, right? Dental, tooth. Okay. Stitches.
They did. Yes. Sure. Yeah. I mean, It wasn't always the bloody mess. Sometimes a rock fight would just be somebody cried and ran home and that was it. But a number of times there was actual injuries and then everybody would just run off in different directions and go home and pretend it never happened. Anyway, that's my rock story. Okay, Chris, what's your number 2?
No, number 4. Remember, number 4, we're going in inversion. Right. Try to keep up. Again, dealing with, and again, this is about that same time period almost as number 5. And I think you're a little bit familiar with this legend. And it was after spending spring break in Palm Springs / Palm Desert, which in the mid to late 80s was a thing, right? It was like, I guess, the equivalent of Fort Lauderdale, without the beach, obviously, because it was in the desert. And it was, and eventually I think it got really chaotic. They started having riots and whatnot. So after spending, 4 or 5 days in Palm Springs, actually Palm Desert, at our good friend Bill's mom's house, who lived out there, and there was half a dozen of us who spent several nights there and wore out our welcome. Pretty quickly, she was very patient and she had unlimited patience, and somehow we pushed past the unlimited patience. But when it was time to go at the end of that trip, and there was one of our people who had left, there was one people there was four of us left as everybody jumped into car. The other car left, and we realized that there was four of us and a pickup truck, and two seats in the pickup truck, and the other two of us had to, what we did at the time, which was legal, which we did at the time, nobody ever thought of as being unsafe or careless or anything like that. We rode in the back of a pickup truck from Palm Springs to San Diego, which at that particular time was about with the traffic and everything else, was about a 2.5, 3 hour ride. And in retrospect, it was ridiculously dumb and careless, and something that only a 19-year-old would do and not think about. Nowadays, it wouldn't even be legal. But we literally the two of us rode in the back of that truck. We couldn't. It was there was so much noise that we ended up putting two sleeping bags. We zipped. I think we did it prior before we got on the road. We zipped two sleeping bags together and kind of climbed into them and created sort of like this tent in the back of this truck, so we could, and we shouted the entire time as we went, balls to the walls, 85 miles an hour in the back of this Toyota pickup truck from Palm Desert to San Diego. And I'll never forget the look. It's kind of rolling up and jumping out of the back of the truck, and for some reason, my parents were standing there as I kind of rolled up to the driveway, and as I jumped out of the truck, and they knew instantly that I had been in the back of the truck all the way from the desert. And so again, so many things could have happened. All of them were bad, right? Could have been catastrophic, tragic, exceedingly painful and violent. But we made it, and it's just something that I look back on as going, man, that was dumb. It didn't take me very long to realize that, probably 7 or 8 minutes into the ride, but this is not great. And, but that was it. Probably looking back, it's like, yeah, that was dumb. That was stupid. We survived, but had a blowout, an accident in front of us, anything else that had happened, and we would no longer have been in the back of that truck. So that was, and everybody involved. You knew everybody involved in that story. So.
Now you have mentioned, you've alluded to this story on a number of episodes, but you've never gotten into great detail. So I think now we know how far you actually drove and how truly dangerous that was in the shallow bed of an open pickup truck to be laying there. And to your point, anytime you had to stop short or anything happened at 70 or 80 miles an hour, it probably would have been the death of both of you. But I will say in this case, I'm going to have to absolve you of the stupidity, only because, as we've mentioned before, Chris, I take your stupidity and I triple it, because I've sat on the wheel well of the truck, right? We've talked about this, right? And driven openly on the freeway to the beach. And again, any bump would have sent me careening over the side of the truck onto the freeway in my bathing suit. So I hear you. That was dangerous, but I would say you're in good company, Chris, because many of us, and I know a lot of people listening to this right now, did at least the same thing. Sat in the open bed of a pickup truck on the freeway. And again, just daring fate, daring the slightest little jostle to send you into oblivion, right?
So, and we did that. We did that constantly. We did that around town, right? Maybe we were just going to Foster's Freeze or something, or SquarePants.
Oh, okay. So what is your point on this one? That it was the length, the distance?
Yeah, absolutely.
You are forgiven.
A 10-minute ride to SquarePants is nothing. Right, a 5-minute ride to SquarePants is in the back of the truck is nothing compared to 2.5, 3 hours at high speeds. With lots of So I mean, I think it's all relative, but absolutely. But we all did, just because of the nature of again, when nobody wore seatbelts or nobody wore helmets or sitting on a wheel well. My dad at one point, my dad worked for Budweiser, and he had a company car that was a Pinto. It was a Ford Pinto with giant Budweiser labels on the side. And so, that was really cool to be a passenger and ride shotgun in that thing. And let's face it, I was actually anybody in a Pinto was sitting on the gas tank, right? Because that's how those cars were designed. But so we all dodged a
Right.
bullet or dodged an explosion when it came to something like that. But yeah, but I think that, again, looking back, it's maybe this is the barometer. This is the how you would measure it now. Had your sons done something like that, right? Had my son done something like that, we would have lost our minds, right? With that magnitude of like, you did what for how
Sure.
long and you with whom and you were doing. So I think that, to me, that's how you can really look at
Yeah.
it of just the passage of time going, wow, that was stupid. That was stupid. What were you thinking? What were you
Yeah.
thinking?
Yeah. It was. But I can see why you made that number 4 and not number 1, because as dumb as it is by today's standards and illegal, back then I would dare say it was a commonplace practice, but maybe not sustained, like you said, for a couple hours on an open road like that. Okay, yeah. So I'm gonna up the ante here, just in terms of the danger factor, and you're gonna see a theme, because this one on mine is also a fight, a type of fight. Yes, that's a theme with Jeff Thill, apparently. But instead of rocks, Chris, how about bottle rockets? I would engage in fights with friends where the only weapon we had was bottle rockets. Now, for those of you that don't quite understand or know what a bottle rocket is, it's a projectile where you light the fuse, right? And you stick it typically in an open bottle, and then it launches like a rocket, and it fires, right? Like the bullet from a gun in whatever direction you point the bottle, right? So light the fuse, point it like a cannon, and let it go. Now, many people at home may say, well, gosh, Jeff, a bottle rocket, that sounds like harmless 4th of July type fun. No, a bottle rocket can actually easily blind you, definitely penetrate your skin, as we found out very quickly, and would just keep burning when it hit. So it wasn't long as we all grabbed, dozens and dozens of bottle rockets, and we all had our Bic lighters and just started getting into positions and firing at each other like Pirates of the Caribbean animatronic characters, just shooting at each other. And they're just zipping right by your head. And then inevitably, Chris, in every single situation, somebody would get hit in the head. They would get hit just to the left of their eyeball. They would literally have scorch marks on their head. And you would eventually, your hair would catch on fire almost every time. And we would laugh as we were putting our hair out, and you could smell the singed hair. One guy, right, after we went through maybe 500 bottle rockets with 1,000 near misses, only a couple people cried, only a couple people had to leave because of burn marks on their skin. We got to the very end, and the last bottle rocket, right, hit a guy in his kneecap, and it hit him so hard that it knocked the wind out of him, and he fell to the ground, convulsing practically. That's how hard these bottle rockets would hit you. And then we all just finally started going, wait a minute. Maybe this was a bad idea, right? Maybe bottle rockets aren't the best thing to be fighting with. But looking back on it, Chris, I mean, at any given time, somebody could have at least been engulfed in flames or lost
an eye,
something, whether it be your hearing or your sight. Yeah. So bottle rocket fights, guys. I do
give you a lot of style points there, and for creativity. We all knew the dangers. I mean, and we talked about that. We talked about the 4th of July and fireworks, and we were kids. We knew the dangers of those things, right? But to use them purposefully like that, to use them as a weapon,
shooting
because
at each other.
I'm kind of bored with rock fighting. There's got to be something else that we can use, right?
Well, it's like you read my mind. That's exactly what we thought.
Right. Style and creativity points off the charts. Again, looking back, that's the kind of stuff that, because I think, we talked about 4th of July, the last episode, and then right after that, I don't know if you saw, there was some guy that, he won the Darwin Awards for this year, or maybe the next 5 years, who died because he put some sort of firework on his head. I don't know if you saw this. And he thought he was wearing, it's 4th of July, obviously. So, and because he was wearing his Uncle Sam hat, he thought he had some sort of protection, and what he did was have massive, skull fractures and brain injuries, and he died. And I'm not trying to make light of that, but sort of thing. So knowing the dangers and yet still purposefully, like I said, it's one thing to have something backfire or to not be ready, but it's to use it not quite as intended, but to use it with a different specific purpose. The worst thing you could have done is, again, there's a lot of things that could have happened, like I just said, and all of them were bad, right? And like you could have started a fire, you could have burned somebody's house down, you could have started you could have started unfortunately a wildfire, right? If the time of year was right, all these things that could have happened, or yes, you could have maimed somebody permanently, somebody lost their sight or lost an appendage or something. So that is unbelievable. Bottle rocket fight.
Chris, I want you to hold that thought on possibly starting a fire, because I've got that one loaded up and ready to go. But what is your number 3?
My number 3, God, I'm sensing a theme, because when I look at some of these, there a couple of them are all in the same. I think maybe that's the good part, is because it was a time period in my life, and so I can kind of chalk that up to just poor decisions. Probably parasailing in Mazatlan. Okay. And when I say parasailing in Mazatlan,
that sounds pretty tame, but okay.
Yeah, it does. Parasailing in Mazatlan. Okay, spring break. So go with me on this one, right? So again, another spring break story. So let's say by the time I had I paid all of $10 for this experience. Okay, so thinking back on this, and that was, and we had been in the hot sun and been drinking like all day long, and yes, parasailing and bungee jumping, all the things that they had, and it was like, let's go do parasailing today. Paid $10, wearing nothing but a bathing suit, right? And I got about 30 seconds worth of instructions. They strapped this vest on me, attached to like this, here's to this here, hold on to this, or, we're going to wrap that around your waist. And then you're going to have these two, they gave me the parachute's laying on the ground. It's right behind me. I'm strapped to this cable, which is, attached to this speedboat. So they said, basically, you're gonna go up. The speed, the wind's gonna pick you up, and you're gonna go straight up, and you're gonna have, in the parachute, you're gonna have 2 handles, and then we'll be on the ground, and when it comes time to land, we're gonna, we'll raise a red flag, and you pull on the right side, and we'll raise a blue flag, and you pull on the left side. So you go like left, right, and then you'll land. Like, not a problem. I got this, right? So we take off from this parking lot. Keep in mind, again, from a parking lot basically adjacent to the beach. And actually, no, it was on the sand at first. So the parking lot comes in. So it takes off from the sand. Again, wearing nothing but a bathing suit, nothing out, no shirt, definitely no flip-flops or shoes or anything like that. Jerked straight up into the air, right? At a, kind of parallel with shore for a minute, and then straightened up. And so then there I am, and I am on this I'm in parasailing, and he's starting to take me around my loop around, in the ocean. And then the engine starts to die. And my chute I wouldn't say the chute was a really good parachute. And I start to sort of dip up and down as I'm like, am I going to go straight into the water? And is this parachute going to be extended at all by the time I land, or I'm just going to go straight into the water? And I don't know and I don't even know how deep it is. I don't know what's under the water or anything like those lines. But it kind of, somehow the engine comes back to life. The guy does this big donut, and I'm zipping around, and then I'm up in the air. And then it's like, okay, time to come back. And so heading back toward the shore. And by then I've got a handle on it. And by then I cannot wait to get back onto the ground. Right. And I'm holding on, and, you see one flag, you pull the left, you see the other flag, you pull the right handle. And they said, a couple of pulls, and you'll be on the ground. And as we head back toward the shore, all of a sudden, yes, I'm like even more parallel to the beach. I'm almost laying, flat. And I see the guy with the flags, and he's going left, right. He looks like some sort of conductor or something with the flags. And I'm jerking on these handles, left, right, more than twice. He said I would do it twice. I did it 30 times. I'm going flat. I'm parallel to the parking lot. And again, it's all asphalt and sand. And somehow, and again, the engine dies right as I got to the beach. And I, at that point, landed, rolled over, tangled up in cords and parachutes, and somehow I was unhurt, other than kind of bruised and again covered in sand in my eyes, sand in my mouth, and again there was a bunch of things that could have happened, and again could have happened in a foreign country on spring break with all my other butthead friends who had been drinking too much and making bad decisions for a week, and God knows what kind of treatment I would have gotten, what kind of care I would have gotten, or how hurt I would have gotten. So again, it's for those of you who have ever parasailed or done anything like that, in Cabo or anything like that, or any sort of tropical place where you can do that, I'm guessing you pay more than $10, and I'm guessing you get more than 5 minutes of instruction, and hopefully the engine doesn't die, and the parachute's not all flat and old and tangled. And so that looking back on that, I didn't tell that story forever, other than to at least it's like, yeah, I went parasailing, it was great, as opposed to what could have, was one of those. Yes, I was glad to be back on the ground, and haven't done it since. So that is number 3 of the mistakes / dumb things I've done.
Well, I would say on that one, that goes with the same thought process like in our very first episode when we talked about roadside carnivals and daring to go on the zipper or anything like that, where it hasn't been maintained. The guy who's monitoring it is definitely on some kind of drug. And Lord knows, I mean, every single time you get in those things, you're taking a chance. But then you add the fact that, right, this was the $10 parasailing. If you thought that was bad, right, obviously these guys probably got a parachute from someone else, right, and it was a fucked up parachute that somebody mended together with duct tape, and it probably wasn't even a sanctioned parachute that ever should have been used, and somebody's boat that they borrowed that they never maintained, so the engine can go out at any time. So Chris, I think that was a pretty good deal for $10. You brushed with death, man. You did the dance, right, with your final maker there. So I think if anything, you got more than you bargained for. Yeah. Wow, that is a dumb decision.
And had I had to, had there been, regulations and laws and inspections and stuff like that, it probably would have cost me more than $10, right? Because they would have had to pass, that cost onto the consumer. So I got what I paid for. I definitely got what I paid for.
Chris, can you really put a price though on understanding that every single day is a blessing and that you really need to appreciate the moment? Can you really put a price on paying $10 and almost dying and seeing your whole life flash before your eyes? I think the lesson you learned was very valuable. And I think almost no amount of money, Chris, can bring you that experience. So good for you.
Okay, well, the price is definitely more than $10. Okay, and now that I feel like this is a Ward asking the Beaver if he learned anything today by his experience, right? So yeah, Dad, I can't put a price, and it's definitely more than $10. Okay. So anyway, so let's hear it. So number 3,
all right.
Are you going to get away from some sort of projectile, or is that your theme? Let's hear number 3.
Well, Chris, you would think, right? This just gets more and more dangerous as we move forward, right? So rock fights, terrible idea. Bottle rockets, wow, that's an extra bad idea. But I had a buddy of mine, my favorite friend growing up when we were little kids, this guy named Scott. I won't use his last name to protect the innocent, but Scott was just the coolest kid ever, but he was not good for me to be around because if I had a bad idea, his was way worse. And we loved caps, Chris. We all remember caps, right? You'd stick them in a little 6-shooter, and they were just meant little gunpowder charges that came in a roll, and the smell of gunpowder was so cool. But they were just meant to be in a cap gun, right?
Or
no big deal.
Or you could lay them out. You could lay them out on the sidewalk and like hit them with a rock or a hammer or something. You'd get the same effect.
Lay them out on the sidewalk and hit them in a row.
But yeah,
you could actually take your fingernail and rub it along a bunch of caps and make it all pop at once if you didn't mind singeing your finger,
right,
which we did quite a bit. Or as Scott taught me, you can't imagine how big the explosion is if you take an entire roll of caps and then take a giant rock and smash the caps with the rock and hear the explosion of an entire roll of caps. And that sounded like a firecracker. However, Chris, where there's one roll, Man, 2 rolls must be way better. So Scott and I got so good at stacking rolls of caps that we were actually able to get 6 or 7 rolls of caps all stacked up and ready to go with a rock that you could barely lift. And then we would drop it on there, and the noise sounded like a stick of dynamite. And we didn't have high-tech cameras back then, but you would see flame, bluish orange flame ejecting from the sides of the rock in all directions. Who cares? Big deal, right? It is a big deal when you do this in the middle of the night, right? Next to a Chevron gas station, which is right up against a bunch of scrub brush. So Scott and I, not content with 5 or 6 rolls of caps, go for the big one, right? We had like 8 or 9 rolls of caps all ready to go, dropped a boulder on top of it. And what did it do, Chris? Yes, it made a super satisfying stick of dynamite sound that deafened us for about 2 days. It also immediately lit the tumbleweeds and the brush on fire. And I don't mean just a little bit, engulfed, absolutely engulfed in flames. And how far did I mention from a Chevron station?
Right next door.
15 feet. I will say in my defense, who the hell lets scrub brush grow that close to a gas pump? That's not on me, Chris. That's on the fire department and city officials. But Scott and I did the only thing that we could do within reason. What did we do, Chris?
You ran.
We had to run away. What else are you going to do? And for those of you wondering at home, no, the fire didn't actually spread, and the gas station didn't explode, and no lives were lost. It just fizzled out pretty quickly there. Thankfully, because talk about dumb kids. Oh my God.
So if had that made the news, that would have fallen in the like, they suspect kids were playing with matches or something like that.
Arsonists. Yeah. Oh yeah. Oh my God. Well, now we'd be domestic terrorism is what that is. Yeah.
No, somebody would have driven by and they would have been recording you on their phone and saw these kids playing with caps and almost burned down Alpha Beta. And I can smell it. I can smell the caps. I can smell it right now. I can smell the caps.
Well, trust me when I say that number 2 and number 1 are way worse.
Okay. Well, this is good because now we're hitting on a bit of a theme, at least for this one, because my second one involves a bit of fire. The worst part, though, is this happened much later in life, much later than probably that I will even. But I'm a bona fide parent when this happens. So, so several years ago, my son. I think my wife had already left the house and got to drop my son off at school, and he's got a PE, like, remember the PE t-shirts we used to wear, they're specifically for PE, and he has to wear a PE t-shirt. And
sure.
My one job that I had failed at was to, I didn't put the last load of laundry in the dryer. And so his PE shirt from the night before was still wet. So, and again, think about this. This is, it's about 7:10 in the morning, 7:15, one of those rushing to get out the door and get my kid out the door, who's about maybe 8 or 9 at the time. And so I put his wet t-shirt. I thought, how can I dry this in a hurry? And I put it in the microwave, and it burst into flame. It burst into flame to the point where I come downstairs. I hit like 45 seconds, and I ran upstairs, and 20 seconds later, I come back down, and there's bona fide. And maybe it would have ran out of oxygen eventually, but there's a big flame coming from the inside of the microwave and smoke. And I'm like, holy shit. I grabbed opened the door. And at that point, I think I grabbed an oven mitt and just started, beating the flame off. And I managed to put it out. It smelled really badly. I burned the shirt, which I immediately grabbed and just almost, and it's hard to say who was the 9-year-old in this situation, but it was me. I grabbed the shirt and I took it outside and threw it in the trash can on the side of the house, and managed to find, well, here's a dirty PE shirt, but this one's going to have to do. And My son's like, "What's burnt?" He's like, "Oh, I burnt some toast." It's still the house smelled all that because to the point where like when my wife came home, it's like, "Why does it smell in here? What is it?" And it was just like, it's like I burnt some toast, and she's like, "That doesn't smell like toast." And well, this is what happened. So again, as a full fledged, allegedly adult, a parent, a contributing member to society, a productive member of society, I almost started a kitchen fire by microwaving my son's wet PE shirt. And in retrospect, right, because you look at these things as time, even though you could look at it, and now it's funny, right, because it could have been tragic. And what is that? What's that line? Tragedy plus time equals comedy. I can laugh about it and joke about it. I could have burned my freaking house down. Everything I owned, everything we owned, I could have burned the house down by microwaving my son's PE t-shirt.
Well,
And
Chris, I will say that on that one, and I think I look. Here's the thing. You're right. It's hilarious that it happened, and it's funny that we all now realize in life, especially as you get kids and you start to have real responsibilities, and the stakes start to escalate in life, that we are only one or two stupid decisions away as parents and adults from something really bad happening that's horribly regrettable that we had no idea would ever happen. But my favorite part of that story, Chris, my favorite part is that even as an adult, you were just like me and Scott. Your first instinct was hide the evidence and run away and try not to admit it and see if I can just somehow have this just not have happened and get rid of all the evidence. I love that instinct. You're lying to your kid who would have loved the story. Hey, do you see what dad did? It's really stupid. Don't ever do this. But no, Chris was, oh no, I burnt some toast. And now he's literally trying to hide the evidence. Like the homicide cops are knocking at the door, and the bloody sickle that he used in the famous icicle murders is now going to have to go into the trash can. And he prays they don't find it, right? And then begrudgingly admits it to his wife, you guys, begrudgingly, only because she cracked him, right? She said, "What's that smell?" And he said, "Oh, I don't know. I was cooking something." And then she probably just gave you one extra look, and you're like, "Okay, I confess, right?" And that's the funny part to me is the
first of all, on your hypotheses, 1,000%. I'm going to let when you did I think you did a slight approximation of my voice, and I kind of sounded like Paul Lind, but I'm going to let that go.
Chris, no. Honestly speaking, that was not my impression of you. That was just my character freaking.
No. I'm going to let that one go. I deserved it. I'll take it all.
I promise that was not you.
Take it all. I'll take it all. But absolutely 1,000%. The little boy that I used to be, that you used to be, obviously, but popped right out, and I, for a moment, lost all parental credibility, and so that was, and again, I was a grown ass man who's supposed to make better decisions than using a microwave as a dryer, because hey, it heats up food really fast. I thought the last thing I would have thought was that it would burst into flames.
Chris, that is the second line in the headline in the San Diego Tribune, is that quote. That is the quote. As you see the smoldered remains of his house, the last thing that I thought would happen to a wet t-shirt in the microwave is that it would light on fire. That is right there. What everybody's reading with their coffee as they go, what a dumb fuck. What is up with this guy? Hey, honey, did you read about this?
Forget about the poodle in the microwave story. How about a t-shirt in their microwave story? And
now, I'm glad you expanded on that story, because that is hilarious. So, okay, well, Chris, you almost killed everyone in your family, including your own child, for no reason other than impatience. So I would say that is pretty bad. Well, this of course brings us to number 2 on my list, which, yes, you guessed it, it involves fire. But Chris, I want you to make sure you're sitting down, and I know you are because I can see you, because this one tops the list in terms of just stupidity. You're probably going to wonder how I can top it. My friend Scott, as we got a little bit older and we were young teenagers, he really wanted to be a stunt man. right? Because of course, he wanted to be like Colt Seavers, right? The fall guy.
The
Yeah.
Fall Guy.
And there's our one poll for the episode right there, The Fall Guy, which they just did a remake, right, with Ryan Gosling. Anyway, so Scott had a swimming pool in his backyard. And the cool thing about it was you could actually jump off of his roof and easily make it into the swimming pool. This wasn't one of those like dangerous stunts. It was pretty easy to just jump off his roof and land in the pool. So that wasn't the scary thing, Chris. Before jumping in the pool, he wore an Army flak jacket that he got at a military surplus place. And he had me, and I willingly did this, Chris, pour surfboard resin all over his back, which is highly flammable. And then he asked me to please light him on fire. Chris, listen to me. I hope you're listening to me.
No, Jeff, I can't listen.
He actually said, Jeff, I want you to light me on fire. And you know what my first thought was? Oh, fuck, yeah, this is going to be awesome. That's my first thought, Chris. You know what my second thought was? Oh, man, I wish I had a camera. Damn, we really should have a camera for this. Do you know what my never thought was? This is a bad idea. This is a really bad idea. So, Chris, what else could I do? I lit him on fire. And here's my favorite part of the story. He was on fire. It looked exactly like a Hollywood stunt.
Did it look like that the Pink Floyd album cover, right? Where the guy in the suit and they're like shaking hands. That's what you were trying to replicate, Jeff, isn't it? That you had that vision. You had wish you were here in your brain thinking this is going to be so cool.
First of all, that's a great album cover. He was not quite that engulfed. And I was not cool enough back then to listen to Pink Floyd. I definitely developed that taste later, and I know Scott wasn't listening to Pink Floyd, but anyway, you guys, his entire back is lit up. Now, here's my favorite part. I'm waiting for him to jump and he's not jumping. And I go, dude, are you going to jump or not? And he's like, dude, light me up and I will. And I'm like, dude, you've been on fire for 10 seconds now. You're on fire. And all of a sudden, sure enough, and of course, you guys, why wouldn't this happen? His hair is on fire in the back of his head. And he's smelling it. And I'm smelling, I'm like, jump. For God's sake, jump. And he's like, you idiot. And he jumps. And oh, it was glorious. I mean, the flames. Look, I know there was some injuries later. I know this was a bad idea, but man, did it look cool. God, I wish we had videotaped it. And it was perfect. He jumps and he lands in the water, immediately extinguishes everything. And yeah, the entire back of his head had been, I wouldn't say torched. He didn't have third-degree burns, but school the next day, he had the best story ever because his hair was completely singed and he had burn marks on the back of his neck. I don't even know where to begin on what would have my mom. I'm trying to think of my mom later on going, why did you murder your friend? Why would you light your friend on fire and murder him? How do you explain this to somebody? But yet somehow the gods of the 1970s were shining down on us that day and somehow he lived. There you go. How do you like that story?
That's phenomenal, Jeff. But I like maybe the best part is how you figuratively lit the fuse, right?
Right.
You didn't have burns. Your hair didn't you didn't risk death or serious injury or even just really bad, pattern baldness as a teenager. You didn't risk any of those things. Again, although, and you were probably, you would have gone, your record would have been expunged because you were so young if something bad had happened. So it was for you, it was pretty much, that was kind of a win-win, other than the fact that you were pissed that you didn't bring your Instamatic, right? So you could, or Polaroid, so you could have captured that. You never had a video camera would have never worked because it would have been too heavy and you couldn't get it.
No, we didn't even have access. No,
and you wouldn't have been able to do all that at once. You definitely needed a third person, right? And you didn't have a third person. That's an incredible story.
Well, Chris, enough of my pyrotechnics. I'm desperate to hear, what is your number one?
My number one, again, that same time period as before, not the recent one. I was not married. I certainly wasn't a parent, as far as I can tell. But it did involve a little bit of danger and friends and jumping into something. So you probably remember back, and anybody who, again, from our area and our neighborhood listening, you remember we had a place specifically. I don't know. I mean, it was in La Jolla. It was a cliff, and it was called the Clam. Do you remember the Clam? Do you remember hearing about the
Don't even
Clam?
start me on how many times I've been down there. And I won't say what we do down there. I'll let you tell your story, but I am
Right.
extremely familiar with the Clam. Yes, continue, sir.
The Clam, a cliff. I want to say it was about 40 feet high. This something like that. That was the legend. It may have been 20. I don't know. It was a cliff over the ocean, over the rocks in La Jolla. You had to kind of go off the beaten path to get there. Sometimes you'd see somebody and then they go, the Clam's that way, because it wasn't really, let's say, it wasn't promoted, wasn't talked about. I don't think it was legal, but it was completely open for those of us to go and get to the Clam. And what'd you do when you get to the Clam? You jumped off the Clam into the water down below. Um, and the thing about the Clam is that it was rocky. Again, you didn't there it was you had very little space to jump off, so it's not like you could take this running jump, right, and sort of launch yourself into the ocean. So you basically had to take a couple steps off the edge of the abyss and into the water, right, Jeff? And you know exactly what I'm talking about. And then also the part about the thing about the Clam was that you needed a spotter, right? Because the water came in and came out and came in and came out. And you needed your spotter to not only understand what he had to be doing, but to be good at it and to be able to say, okay, ready, jump now. And then you had to jump and you couldn't hesitate. You had to go and hope on the way down. You had to know that you had to hope that they timed it correctly and you were not going to land instead on the rocks on the shore, instead of in the water. And even the water, and again, no, probably wasn't 40. It was pretty high up. I mean, it was higher than like a public pool high dive. It was pretty high. And again, you were jumping into the ocean, not a controlled environment that was specific. And you didn't, and I don't know, we knew nothing what was under there, right? You could have landed on a rock. You could have hit a sandbar. You could have whatever. So jumping off the Clam, at a spur of a moment in the middle of the afternoon with a handful of my friends, there may have been alcohol involved, and we decided to jump off the Clam. Shout out to Mike Galloway, who was my particular spotter, who was the Clam, the Clam king of clams, if I recall correctly. He had done it. He would just go back and he would do it multiple times. I told myself, again, because you know how we already established how I succumbed to peer pressure. I told myself, this is it. I'm doing it once. Mike was the kind of guy that would jump off and like it was like a ski run. And he would go right back up to the top and do it again. It's like, no, I am never doing this again. You've insulted my manhood. You're crushing my ego. You're, everything else. I'm going to do this once to say that I did it. I did it. And that was it. If you flash forward now, I guess if you look it up, you can't even, and I think it was many years, not too many years afterward, you know exactly what I'm talking about because you obviously have done it and you could share yours, but they had to close off the path because there's been so much erosion and the launching and everything else that jumping off of that is essentially, yeah, if you want to commit suicide, go jump off the Clam because there's no water anywhere around or it's very, very shallow and very rocky, but jumping off the Clam, I look at as yes, because of the circumstances, because of having to trust my spotter, even though Mike knew what he was doing, and everything else. In retrospect, boy, that was stupid because again, there was a lot of things that could have happened, and most of them were bad. It did hurt. I mean, it still hurt when you hit that water, right? It was like, it was painful, but I walked away from it, swam away from it, and then I walked away from it.
You're right, guys. People that can't quite picture this, although Chris described it beautifully, you had to have someone at the bottom spotting you to let you know when the waves were coming in, when the tide was coming in, so that you actually had something to jump into. When the tide was out, as the water receded, here's what was revealed: razor sharp barnacles and rock. That's what you were really jumping into. And only by the grace of God, when the tide was in, did you have about a 4 or a 5 foot buffer of water that was very fluid and coming in and coming out. So, I mean, so many kids did not time it correctly and would end up with either a broken leg or just. And by the way, if for no one out there that's had the pleasure of being cut by a barnacle, it is a brand new hell because it is so razor sharp. And what I love about barnacles, almost like paper cuts, is you oftentimes don't even know that you were sliced until you get out of the water, and then your leg is cold and it's got ocean water on it. So it doesn't start bleeding until about 30 seconds later. And then all of a sudden, inevitably, someone's looking down and going, dude, your leg, holy shit. And I remember these kids that were lining up to jump off it a second or a third time, and their leg looked like something out of a triage scene in a war movie. It's like, dude, what happened to your leg? Yep. It's like, oh my God. And it's just pouring blood from having brazed up against a barnacle.
Right.
But Chris, and again, please forgive me, but I now have to add in one tiny little story, which is I actually did something even more dangerous than the clam. I don't know if you're aware of this, but behind that little spot where you would jump for the clam was a ledge. And the ledge was behind the clam's ledge, and it was called the bear claw.
I vaguely remember
bear
that.
Claw.
Right, okay.
And the bear claw meant, you guys, that
you
would have to get a running start and jump off the bear claw. And the bear claw was about 5 or 6 feet higher than the clam. But here's the problem. You had to get enough speed, because if you didn't go if you didn't go far enough out, you would smack into the ledge of the clam. You had to actually clear the clam ledge, and many people didn't clear it, and they would crack their backs on the edge of the clam and then fall into the water. So, man, if you hauled butt, and you didn't, like to your point, Chris, you didn't even have a runway. It was like 2.5 feet of runway. So you had to really just spring launch off the bear claw, barely clear the clam ledge, and then end up in the water and hope that the water had come in enough that you didn't just impale yourself on barnacles. Well, by God, that was a great one. I love that, man. Well, don't feel bad, Chris. That was a good kind of a dare. I think that's a good memory you've got there, sir.
Well, thank you. So you're number one, Jeff. Let's hear it. Flames, pyrotechnics, projectiles, heavy objects. What could it possibly be? Because you seem to have covered projectiles.
Well, Chris and I did not plan this out ahead of time. We did not tell each other what we were going to be saying here on this episode.
We did not.
But strangely, it involves a cliff, and it's not the clam. And this one's going to seem a little bit anticlimactic, but the stakes on this one are the highest they've ever been. And this is not quite as dramatic of a story in terms of the buildup. It doesn't involve any fire, but here's what happened. A buddy of mine in high school and I, in the 80s, his name is Tim, last name protected. And we were driving around in his Pontiac GTO, and it had been a long night, and we had been going to different parties, and it was the end of the night, and we were pulling over in a construction zone. This was just where they were building houses on one of these little side streets. In the middle of the night, we pulled over, and there may have been marijuana in the car. Who am I to say? Perhaps that's what was in there, Chris. Maybe that's what was going on. But he's on this dirt lot in a little construction area off the main road where they're building houses, and he keeps creeping forward in his car, and he's a bit buzzed, right? And he has his lights turned off because he doesn't want to attract the attention of anybody. And it's for the grace of God that I happen to just kind of see something in front of the car, and I go, stop. And he stops the car. And we both get out of the car and we walk up to the front of it. His tire is maybe 6 inches from the edge of a cliff. Maybe 6 inches. Chris, for no reason whatsoever, a couple of buzzed kids, after partying all night, are going to pull off into a dirt lot and drive off a cliff. And by the way, this wasn't a little cliff. Whoever didn't put up pylons or tape or barriers,
Right.
Again, I have to blame them. I blame the people that didn't make it safe for me, Chris. But all I could think of was my mom, as they're all crying in the funeral, and she's thinking, why did Jeff commit suicide? Why did these kids think that they had to kill themselves? Why? That's all you could imagine, right? And it's just by the sheer luck that we didn't just drive off. And the cliff, Chris, yeah, it was a big cliff. Chris, this cliff, we definitely would have died. This was about 50 feet down. Lord help us.
Jeff and Tim doing their Thelma and Louise, basically. Well, maybe, and again, I'm sorry to play devil's advocate, Jeff, but maybe there were things, maybe there was tape, maybe there was some sort of barrier, but you couldn't see it because it was the middle of the night.
Right. It's possible.
And maybe
that is possible.
There may have been a sign saying, "Stop, do not pass this point." I'm just going to go on a limb. No pun intended. I'm going to go on a limb here and say that maybe there was some safeguards, and maybe not. But hey, that's terrifying. I can only think of how you must have felt when you realized, right? When your heart stopped beating and you could stop visibly seeing it pounding through your skin, right? That, dude, we almost died. Something to that effect.
We absolutely. Right? And the best part of the story was before I realized that the front tires were that close to the cliff, I almost inadvertently stepped right off the edge of the cliff into the abyss. And that would have been the best, right? Not only did the car stop in time, but then I just walk right off the edge, just like for no reason, right? That's how he died. Wow. What happened to Jeff Thill? What happened to him? We don't know. All you would have is Tim's story to back it up.
Or if you'd have both died, they would have made this story up about this bizarre suicide pact that the two of you had, and everybody would have been wondering, like, what went wrong, what happened, why did they do this on this night, other than
and then they would start questioning our relationship. Maybe Tim and I had a forbidden love. We don't know.
I wasn't.
There would have been a lot of speculation the next day. Let's just put it that way. Yeah.
Right. It would have been. Yeah. That would have been something else. So I would have gone to your funeral and I would have speculated.
Yeah,
that's
right. Well, definitely. Knowing you, Chris, and your friends, with your
yes, Jeff, you're the same friends. Don't blame me. It was the same group of friends.
You're shallow. Superficial.
Well, at least he was skinny.
Yeah, you're super, right? Exactly.
Like when the Fonz used to quote James Dean, it was like live fast, die young, leave a good looking corpse, right? So that would have been, at least you wouldn't have, needed to join Weight Watchers. So you would have had that going for you, I guess. I don't know. See, and I'm the shallow one. The shallow one. I get it.
Well. So look, there we go. We got through our top 5 dumb decisions. I felt really good hearing yours because frankly, I feel like, you're a good guy, Chris. You don't need to feel bad about any of those. I think those are all Jeff. Just fine. I think you can go to bed at night knowing that you're not as dumb as you might think you are, sir. However, I don't feel that you're going to feel the same way after hearing my stories.
No, I think no. I don't. I feel you're better. You're better because, Jeff, none of yours happened in the last 20 years.
Well, that's a good point.
Okay, none of yours happened in the last 12 years.
Oh yeah. Oh,
okay.
Ouch.
So that is the distinction, right. And none of yours did you try to cover up or play down in the last 20 years. So
nope. No, I owned them. Yeah,
I win. I don't know what I win again, but I win most shallow decision.
Yeah.
I maybe win at least tied for worst, dumbest, stupidest, but definitely most embarrassing considering my age when I did it.
Yeah.
So again, I don't know if there's any winners today, Jeff, but no, I appreciated yours, and they get it. Yours are great because Jeff, you took a turn. I thought for sure that last one would have involved some massive explosion or some sort of detonation. And although, let's say if TV's to be believed, right, anytime a car goes off a cliff, it lands there's like 4 or 5 seconds of dead silent, then an enormous kaboom and a plume of smoke and a fireball. So
Now, the only saving grace is that Tim and I were low on funds and only had a little bit of gas left. So I'm afraid it would have been very anticlimactic. There might have been a little poof, but there certainly wouldn't have been enough gas to create any kind of a dramatic exit into the abyss. You would have heard a clunk, and that would have been about it. And then they just a bunch of speculation the next day, and that's all that we would have had.
or had there been one or two girls that were willing to talk to you at those various parties, you may not have found yourself driving through a construction site in the middle of the night. Maybe a better option would have presented itself. I'm just going to put that out there.
Well,
so it wasn't even your fault.
Well done.
Wasn't even your fault.
Well, there you go. We've absolved ourselves of all stupidity. And honestly, I think we've hit the true heart of the 70s and 80s and Gen X by, really revealing some of the dumbest decisions. But honestly, I have to blame the decade. There you go. Well, by God, I think in the next episode, Chris, if we can tease the next episode, you and I are going to have to go into part 2 of this, which is injuries. I think in the next episode, Chris, we're going to have to do our top 5 greatest injuries sustained during the 70s and 80s. And I know, Chris, man, I've already seen a peek at your list. It's impressive. So until next time.
Till next time, Jeff.